In an old house deep in Louisiana, where cypress trees guard century-old secrets and the heavy air carries untold stories, Christina held a letter that would forever change her life. The paper trembled in her hands like magnolia leaves in the wind as she gathered courage to share her story with Caio Fabio, a man whose words had touched her heart through the computer screen. The ceiling fan turned lazily above, casting dancing shadows that resembled the ghosts of her past. "There are wounds," she wrote in her diary, "that only truth can heal, and pains that only forgiveness can soothe." It was time for her story to be told. Christina sat at her antique desk, where the evening light filtered through lace curtains. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, letting the words flow like the Mississippi River on a spring morning. "Dear Mr. Caio Fabio," she began, "I noticed reading your website that the Lord Jesus places bold words in your mouth. I write this letter, therefore, believing that as both a psychoanalyst and a pastor, you might present me with a truth still unknown to my ears." The air conditioner hummed softly, a constant reminder of the present. As she dove into memories of the past, Christina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of each word she needed to share. "Browsing your website, I haven't seen a case like mine. That's why I take the liberty of writing to you. My childhood was marked by experiences that no child should endure. Like a flower growing in shadows, my development was distorted by traumas that followed me into adulthood." Tears stained the keyboard as she continued her narrative, describing how her youth had been tainted by destructive choices, alcohol, harmful relationships, consequences she still carried. "At 30, I left that lifestyle behind, but the scars remained. I developed a series of health issues that culminated in hospitalization. That's when I discovered I suffered from bipolar disorder, but that wasn't even close to being my greatest challenge." Christina paused, watching a hummingbird through the window. Like that tiny creature, she too longed for freedom, for a chance to taste the sweet nectar of true and healthy love. "Since I was 25, I've sought help through therapies and alternative treatments. I went through various professionals, but none could identify the root of my suffering. Because of these imprecise diagnoses, I committed numerous social mistakes, whose consequences I still carry with me." Night was falling over the city, and with it came memories of childhood nights. But now, years later, she was finally finding her voice to speak about the source of her pain. The result of this history, and the central point of my narrative, is a series of fears and afflictions. But the most difficult is a distorted relationship with my own intimacy. I developed thought patterns that prevent me from having healthy relationships. Christina described how her mind had become a prison of intrusive thoughts, where only scenarios of submission and humiliation could awaken positive sensations. It was as if her body had learned the language of trauma so deeply that it had forgotten how to speak any other tongue. "I've never been able to experience connection without mentally activating an entire set of thoughts where I'm diminished and mistreated. The most painful part is that in these mental scenes, it's always the other who feels pleasure, never me." The moon was beginning to rise on the horizon when she continued her narrative, describing how she had given up on seeking relationships. "Without these thoughts, without activating these mental mechanisms, without these fantasies, I feel completely disconnected from my emotions."
Caio's response arrived on an autumn morning when the oak leaves were beginning to turn golden. His words were like balm for an old wound. "My dear sister, grace and peace. Jesus is a brother. God is Father. And since you don't complain about abuse from a brother, Jesus doesn't offend. But as your traumatic experiences began very early, then God, the Father, became part of the trauma image. which on one side transfers, and on the other side, projects onto the absolute idea of father. He explained how trauma had created neurological pathways in her brain, like rivers that over time had carved deep valleys in her psyche. But just as rivers can change their course, so too can the brain create new pathways. Don't worry about God. He is great. He is Father. He understands, and more. Whoever has the Son has the Father, and vice versa. With the Father, everything is right in the Son. Christina read and reread the letter, each word building a new understanding of herself. Caio spoke about how her contradictory feelings made sense within the context of her trauma, how her capacity to feel pleasure wasn't irreparably damaged, just temporarily redirected. It's obvious that not everyone who has suffered trauma develops the same path as you. However, given your history, the path your soul took is one of the obvious ones in face of what happened and the intestinal and atavistic force of the trauma. He explained how her conflicting feelings were visceral in nature, as visceral as the nature of her deepest emotions. Thus, the anger that cannot be expressed, associated with intense trauma, can create this term where negative feelings mix with physical sensations. The letter continued explaining how her brain had created new circuits to deal with the trauma. In other words, normally anger diminishes positive sensations, doesn't increase them. But in your brain, the circuit leads directly to physical provocation because of the mental bond created by years of association between pain and intimacy. Caio then offered hope and direction. You shouldn't leave your psychiatrist, nor should you self-medicate. Clearly you need chemical help to sleep and to calm yourself for a while longer. And more, you also need psychological support. The letter ended with a message of hope. Don't give up, it's just beginning. If you allow it around, of course, as I said, the miracle is you. Only you can prevent healing, and you know that.